Hey everybody, how's it going? So today we are going to go over this article, How the Apple Lobbying Machine Took on Georgia and Won. I disagree with some of the premises in this article. I'm kind of curious what you all think. This doesn't have to do with right to repair. It has to do with app stores and the App Store monopoly, if you believe it is a monopoly. And I want to just really dig into some of the phrasing and the words that are used here. So it says, poorly resourced state governments are no match for the lobbying firepower of Apple, the most valuable company in the world. And it says here, when Apple wanted to kill off 2 bills in Georgia this year, it rushed lobbyists to the state legislature, threatened to abandon key economic projects, and persuaded the state attorney general to push for an Apple-friendly amendment. So when it says that poorly resourced state governments are no match for the lobbying firepower, is it that they're poorly resourced governments, or is it that people within those governments make decisions that are pro-Apple because they feel like making a decision that's pro-Apple? I think it's a little bit more the latter. 2 months later, the bill that had appeared to have the most momentum stalled in the Georgia House Judiciary Committee. The committee chair did not bring the legislation to a vote during this year's legislative session, effectively killing it in the lower chamber. Apple's aggressive lobbying efforts in Georgia, the extent of which were previously unreported, highlight a pattern that has played out with little national attention across the country this year. State lawmakers introduced bills that would force Apple and its fellow tech giants, Google, to give up some control over their mobile app stores. Then, Apple in particular exerts intense pressure on lawmakers with promises of economic investment or threats to pull its money, and the legislation stalls. Now, again, what are they pulling their money from? When you say a poorly resourced state legislature, is it that the state legislature is poorly resourced, or is it that is it something else? Apple has been able to intimidate and use a lot of money to kill legislation, said Representative Regina Cobb, a Republican state lawmaker in Arizona who championed an App Store bill that didn't pass her state Senate. Cobb said she has been closely following Apple's playbook in other states. They do it in different ways in each state, but it all comes down to strong-arming the legislature. They've thrown those dollars around. People have seen that, and I think legislators are running a little scared and saying, I'm not touching this. I'm not going to put my fingers in this because it could have a negative impact on me in the future. How would it have a negative impact on you in the future? How? And I think that this is a case of certain legislators is fundamentally not having the balls to do something they believe in. Now, it'd be one thing if their constituents all disagree with them, but it's another if their constituents agree with them. State legislators are often quicker moving and more flexible than federal government, meaning they can be better placed to take action on complex and controversial issues. But poorly resourced local lawmakers have struggled to brush aside Apple's lobbying firepower as the company hires key state lobbyists and focuses on killing legislation that threatens the company's bottom line. So a lobbyist is going to speak to a legislator. You are the legislator. So if you want, you have the choice. You have the power to come together and say, no, we're not listening to you people. But you don't. While Google has also lobbied against many of the state-level bills, Apple has been the more aggressive and visible opponent across multiple states, a shift for a company that has long been seen as taking a quieter approach to lobbying than its competitors. At issue is how big of a cut independent app developers should have to give to Apple and Google of revenue they earn through the company's app stores. State lawmakers behind the bill say they want to attract app developers who might be more likely to bring business to their states if state-friendly laws are on the books. Both Apple and Google charge developers 30% of any revenue on digital purchases and don't allow developers to give users any alternative ways to pay. At least 7 states, including Minnesota, New York, Illinois, Hawaii, are considering such legislation. Democrats and Republicans in the U.S. House and Senate have also introduced proposals to rein in Apple's and Google's control over their app stores, although tech reform legislation still faces an uphill battle in both evenly divided chambers. An Apple spokesperson argued its App Store model delivers privacy and security for users, along with a business opportunity for app developers. This legislation threatens to break that very successful model, the spokesperson said, adding that it could discourage innovation and open the door for consumer fraud. Citation? Any citation for consumer fraud being widespread as a result of this? Can you give us an example of consumer fraud as a result of this? Can you show how this has happened in a horrible way before? Of course not. Fraud, security, privacy, danger, fraud, security, privacy, danger. The children! There are heavyweights on the other side as well. Major app developers, including Match Group and Spotify, have aggressively pushed for App Store bills across the country. A lobbyist representing Match Group handed that legislation to Cobb in Arizona, and the Coalition for App Fairness, which counts Epic Games, Match Group, and Spotify as members, has been hiring lobbyists in multiple states. But even the most powerful members of that coalition don't have anywhere near the resources of Apple. Apple, the world's most valuable company with a $2.1 trillion market capitalization, has successfully wielded its money in the states in a way that most companies would not be able to, threatening jobs and offering massive investments, a tactic that has prompted its opponents to claim they are engaging in unethical behavior and potentially violating state ethics laws in at least one instance in North Dakota. It's a particularly striking dynamic for a company that has a less public federal lobbying presence than its tech peers, Facebook, Google, and Amazon. Last quarter, Facebook and Amazon each spent more than $4.5 million in federal lobbying, while Apple spent $1.6. Now, again, when they say that they are going to threaten jobs or offer massive investments, what are those massive investments in? When Apple says we are going to pull off massive investment in your state, where? How? Show us. Tell us what that is so that I can actually believe you. Apple used its power to not only deprive American consumers of greater innovation and options, but also to silence critics and prevent the debate of these critical issues from even happening, says Megan DiMuzio, executive director of the Coalition for App Fairness, the industry group fighting for the App Store legislation. Apple's hard-changing tactics attracted national attention in Arizona and North Dakota, but the approach has also been effective in smaller states such as Louisiana and Georgia. When Georgia legislators introduced a pair of App Store bills in early February, Apple immediately hired 5 new lobbyists to advocate against the legislation in the state. And during the frenzied debate following the bill's introduction, Apple lobbyists told legislators that the company could pull out of the 2 important economic development projects in Georgia, a $25 million investment in a historically black college in Atlanta, and a potential multi-billion-dollar partnership with Kia to build autonomous vehicles in the city of West Point if the legislation went through, according to 2 people familiar with the conversations. They spoke anonymously in order to discuss private discussions. Apple denied making statements about pulling back on investments. The threats in Georgia came from third-party Apple lobbyists, said one of the people familiar with the conversations. Really now? Okay. So the company saying that third-party repair should not be a thing is the company that's hiring third-party lobbyists and then blaming the third-party lobbyists for the stuff that goes wrong. Oh, my God. You can't make this up. This is hysterical. Meanwhile, 3 Apple lobbyists reached out to the Georgia Attorney General's office to argue the legislation would put the state in legal jeopardy, according to the emails obtained through a public records request from a tech watchdog group, Tech Transparency Project, and shared with Politico. Did I just not say the word transparency at all? Wow, I think I just went transparent. One lobbyist emailed the Attorney General's office 3 days after the bill was introduced to stress that the legislation was being pushed by our competitors. Another chatted up Attorney General Chris Carr in a hallway, listing off statistics that showing Georgia app developers generally pay lower fees, then supplied a detailed legal analysis citing court cases as evidence the bill could be unconstitutional. The third sent an email to Carr's chief of staff saying he was interested in potential legal cost and exposure to the state given existing legal action, and if passage of these bills would put the state in a legal bind. He followed that with, not an attorney, so I probably said that incorrectly. But who cares? You're a lobbyist. Several weeks after the bills were introduced, Carr's Director of External Affairs, Jordan Watson, shared Apple's concerns with the Georgia House Judiciary Committee lawyer. The lawyer sent back an amendment that would water down the legislation. Here's a substitute for HB 229, the App Store bill, which we spoke about earlier this week. The lawyer said in an email to Watson, I know you were getting questions on it. Let me know if this new version alleviates concerns or creates new ones. So they're taking a proposed piece of legislation. They're just editing it the way they want to make it have no teeth and then sending it back. The company writing the legislation that we all have to live with. Lovely. Ultimately, the session ended without lawmakers acting on the Georgia App Store legislation. Katie Bird, communications director for Carr, said the Attorney General's office does not take positions on general legislation. And in keeping with that policy, we did not take a position on these bills. There were a few routine conversations about the bills making their way through the legislative process, and our staff forwarded the information that was shared with our office to those in the legislature who asked for it, Bird said. But the emails with the Attorney General's office show a friendly back and forth with Apple, and staffers actively checking in with lobbyists. In an email with the bill's names in the subject line, Watson, the Carr staffer, wrote to the lobbyist Rufus Montgomery, how's it going, my man? And what are you hearing? I have never, ever gotten an email regarding right to repair in 7 years from any senator, any congressman, any House of Representatives member, or any assembly person saying, how's it going, my man? What do I have to do to get that kind of friendship? At another point, Carr's chief of staff, Travis Johnson, wrote to Montgomery, feel free to share any information you're able to. Montgomery is a longtime Georgia lobbyist with close ties to the state and a reputation for brokering big deals. The other lobbyists include Tyler Stevens, who is registered to lobby for Apple at the federal level with GOP-aligned firm Fierce Government Relations, said Matt Konenkamp, who is registered to lobby for Apple in North Dakota. Asked why they were not registered in Georgia, both said they had not spent enough time lobbying officials in the state to meet the threshold that would require them to register under state law. Isn't that convenient? The legislation in Georgia could have another shot next year after App Store-related provisions were appealed to a separate bill in the Senate. But one lobbyist for an app developer in the state told Politico they don't expect it to go anywhere. The playbook was similar in North Dakota. Apple representatives held a closed-door meeting with nearly every member of the Senate industry, business and labor community. What did I just say? Business and Labor Committee the day before it held a hearing on their vision of the App Store legislation without providing any public agenda or information on the gathering. The committee did not provide public notice or minutes of the meeting, a potential violation of state ethics law, but who cares? Again, you're a lobbyist. Apple confirmed that it met with the committee. Soon after, the North Dakota Senate voted against the bill. Big surprise there. In Louisiana, Apple proactively offered to invest significant resources in boosting the state's educational system while convincing the state lawmaker behind an App Store bill to stand down. Rep. Daryl Deshotel, the Louisiana state lawmaker who introduced one of the App Store bills, ran ads to raise awareness about the Apple and Google's control over the App Store, but ultimately he agreed to pull his bill in May. During the hearing in which he stood down on the legislation, Deshotel said he had spoken to the Apple lobbyists extensively. During those talks, I had an opportunity to talk about Louisiana, to talk about where we were falling behind and our communities that were suffering, Deshotel said. Through those talks, we found we had common goals of empowering the underserved and connecting people. Did you now? Did you? We set up a tentative meeting where they're committed to flying in their K-12 specialists, their higher ed specialists, engineers, and broadband experts, Deshotel said at the May hearing. Apple said it is continuing to have conversations about education programs in Louisiana and that it believes in reminding lawmakers about the positive contributions the companies have made in their states. As state efforts wither, the federal government could be app developers' best bet. A bipartisan trio of senators, Richard Blumenthal, Democrat from Connecticut, Marsha Blackburn, Republican from Tennessee, and Amy Klobuchar, Democrat from Minnesota, earlier this month introduced legislation that would force Apple and Google to allow developers to use alternative app stores and tell customers about cheaper prices online. As mobile technologies have become essential to our daily lives, it has become clear that a few gatekeepers control the app marketplace, wielding incredible power over which apps consumers can access, said Klobuchar, the chair of the Senate Judiciary Antitrust Subcommittee. Companion legislation was also introduced in the House. It's unclear if that legislation has a path forward, particularly in a Senate that requires significant Republican sign-on and during a congressional session with many higher priorities. Hint, Republicans don't like big tech. Maybe kind of focus in on that a little bit to get them to sign on. Cobb, the Arizona lawmaker, said she has limited faith that the federal government can act more quickly than the states. She's working on finding a path forward with her legislation next session. Waiting is not an option, Cobb said. Why would we wait and hope we haven't put all our eggs in the basket of the federal government when we know they haven't been able to do anything up to this point? I agree. At the same time, you must not accept this premise that the company is wielding so much money and power in the state. No, they're not. They're offering the opportunity to work with you on a K-12 education program that is most likely going to be half-baked, half-done virtue signaling. The same thing, we had a garbage computer lab in my high school, junior high school, and public school, and K-5 that was donated by whatever, and it was garbage. We had somebody that said, here's how you use a word processor, here's how you turn the computer on and off, and it was most likely something that got contributed so that they could say that they did something to help the kids, when in reality they're really just trying to get their own agenda passed. And what makes me sad here, again, it's one thing if the legislator himself says, listen, I don't believe in this. I don't think this is a problem. If you think it's a problem, make your own hardware, make your own app store. If they said that, then I could at least respect them tabling or pulling the bill. But when they believe in the bill, and as it said in this article, they actually raised money to advertise, to raise awareness for this as an issue. They believed in it as an issue. And then they just shelve it because they say, hey, let's talk about a K-12 program. Really? Really? Again, if you didn't believe in the bill, that's one thing. I could at least respect you there because you're for your convictions. But if you believe in the bill and you're like, I'm just going to pull it because I'm so scared of their K-12 programs that, I don't know. It seems really sad to me. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. That's it for today. And as always, I hope you learned something. And hopefully someday, I am able to have people that are staffers for politicians speak to me in this same manner. I would love someday for a senator or an assembly person or a congressman to send me an email and say, hey, how's it going, my man? What are you hearing, Lewis? Probably not going to happen. Hey, see you all in the next video.